Y Ambassador Kethvara had served the Galactic Council for 37 years. She had visited 900 worlds, negotiated peace between species that had fought for centuries, and memorized every law and regulation that governed the 38-member civilizations. She believed she understood how the galaxy worked. She was wrong. It started on an ordinary evening in her office on Station Prime, the massive diplomatic hub that floated at the center of council space. She was reviewing star charts for an upcoming trade negotiation when she noticed something strange. A gap in the map. A region roughly 300 light-years across where the data simply stopped at first. She assumed it was a technical error. The Galactic Archive contained information on 17 billion star systems. Surely a few might be missing due to corrupted files or outdated surveys. She submitted a request to the central database, expecting a routine explanation. The response came immediately, and it made no sense at all. Information restricted by Council Mandate 0. Kethvara stared at the message. She had memorized every council mandate from the founding documents to the most recent amendments. There was no mandate 0. The numbering system began at 1 and currently extended to 4,847. She tried the query again with different parameters. The same response appeared. She spent the next 3 hours searching for any reference to this mysterious mandate. Nothing existed in any public or classified database she could access. It was as if someone had created a rule specifically to hide this region of space and then erased all evidence that the rule existed. The following morning, she approached Delegate Mortan of the Yethric Assembly. He was old, even by the standards of his long-lived species, and he had served on the council since before Kethvara was born. If anyone knew the answer, it would be him. "I need to ask you about something," she said, keeping her voice low. They were in the Great Hall, surrounded by hundreds of diplomats from dozens of species. But she still felt the need for caution. Morton's 4 eyes blinked slowly. "You have found the blank space on the map." It was not a question. "How did you know?" "Because every curious young diplomat finds it eventually." His scales shifted color, a sign of discomfort in his species. "My advice to you is simple. Forget you noticed. Do not investigate further. Do not ask questions. Simply accept that some knowledge is not meant to be shared." Kethvara felt her frustration rising. "That is not an answer. It is the only answer I can give you." Mortan glanced around nervously. "That region is human territory. No council species has entered it in over 300 years. No council species will ever enter it again." "Why? What happened?" The old delegate leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Do you know of the Thessarian Concordat? The Vorish Empire? The mindful collective of Yen?" Kethvara searched her memory. The names were vaguely familiar, but she could not place them. "I have heard references, but I cannot recall the details." "That is because they no longer exist." Mortan's eyes were wide now, showing white around the edges. 3 of the most powerful civilizations in galactic history, commanding fleets that numbered in the tens of thousands, controlling territories that spanned half the outer arm, gone, erased, as though they had never been. That is impossible. Wars leave survivors, refugees, records. These were not wars. Mortan straightened up, clearly eager to end the conversation. The last Thessarian ship entered human space to conduct a routine survey. It was crewed by 400 personnel. 3 days later, the ship returned to council space with no crew aboard. The navigation computer had been programmed to deliver a message. What message? Mortan was already walking away. He spoke over his shoulder without turning around. "Do not return." Kethvara stood alone in the Great Hall, surrounded by the noise and activity of galactic diplomacy, and felt cold for the first time in her life. That night, she began her real investigation. She accessed historical archives from before the Great Consolidation, when record-keeping was less centralized and harder to control. What she found there kept her awake until dawn. The humans had first made contact with the galactic community approximately 400 years ago. At that time, they had been considered unremarkable. a soft-bodied species with short lifespans and primitive technology, is barely capable of traveling within their own solar system. Several council species had debated whether to classify them as intelligent at all. The records from that period were incomplete. But Kethvera managed to piece together a troubling pattern. First contact with humanity had been claimed by at least 17 different species. Each time, the contacting species had filed initial reports describing Earth and its inhabitants. Each time, the reports simply stopped after a few months or years. No explanations, no follow-up, no final entries. Just silence. The 18th contact was different. The Vorish Empire had been the dominant military power of that era. A species of conquerors who had absorbed or destroyed over 60 civilizations during their expansion. They had developed a system for dealing with primitive species, arrive in force, demonstrate overwhelming power, and harvest the population for slave labor. It was efficient and brutal, and no species had ever successfully resisted. The Vorish had declared humans a protectorate species and sent a harvest fleet to Earth. The fleet consisted of 2,000 warships and carried enough soldiers to occupy a planet 10 times Earth size. Kethvora found the final transmission from the Vorish command vessel. It was dated 16 hours after the fleet arrived at Earth. The text was brief. They are awake. May the void have mercy on us all. After that, there were no more Vorish records. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years simply ceased to exist. Their homeworld was still there, according to long-range scans. But no life signs had been detected on its surface for 4 centuries. Kethvera closed the archive and sat in darkness, trying to process what she had learned. The humans were not a primitive species that had been ignored by the galactic community. They were something else entirely. Something that had destroyed one of the most powerful civilizations in history in less than a day. And the Council had responded not with war or sanctions or diplomatic pressure, but with silence. They had erased the humans from the map, forbidden all contact, and pretended the blank space did not exist because they were afraid. Kethvora realized that she was afraid too. But she was also curious, and curiosity had always been stronger than fear in her nature. She needed to understand what had really happened 400 years ago. She needed to know what the humans had become. She began planning her next steps, unaware that her investigation had already been noticed by those who watched for such things. On a small station at the edge of human space, a tired man named Daniel received an alert on his console. Someone was asking questions again. He sighed and made a note in his log. Perhaps this one would be wise enough to stop. Perhaps she would become another cautionary tale whispered in the halls of the council. Either way, he would be ready. Dr. Nathan Cole had spent his entire adult life trying to understand alien species. He had earned 3 degrees in xenanthropology, published over 200 academic papers, and traveled to more worlds than he could easily count. He was considered one of the foremost human experts on galactic cultures, and universities across council space invited him to lecture and teach. But there was something that had bothered him for years, something he could never quite explain. The aliens were afraid of him, not obviously afraid. They did not run away when he entered a room or refused to speak with him. The fear was subtle, hidden beneath layers of politeness and diplomatic protocol. It showed in the way conversations would pause when he approached, in the way his colleagues would avoid certain topics, in the way even the most confident alien academics would hesitate before disagreeing with him, as if worried about the consequences. Nathan had assumed at first that it was simple prejudice. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, and some species still viewed them as primitive outsiders. But prejudice usually came with contempt, not fear. The aliens did not look down on him. They looked at him the way a person might look at a sleeping predator, careful not to make any sudden movements. He shared his observations with his research assistant, a young woman named Lily Grant. She was brilliant, ambitious, and completely uninterested in the politics that governed academic life. If Nathan was cautious by nature, Lily was the opposite. She asked uncomfortable questions and refused to accept incomplete answers. "I have been noticing the same thing," she told him one afternoon in his office on Mars Colony. "Last week I was presenting my research on Yethric burial customs, and one of the senior professors asked me a question about human death rituals. When I answered, the entire room went silent, like I had said something terrifying." "What did you say?" "I talked about how humans historically buried or burned their dead, but how modern practices focus more on memory preservation and legacy continuation." "Basic stuff," Lily shook her head. The professor looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk. Nathan leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "Something happened in our past. Something the galaxy remembers but refuses to discuss, and we either do not know about it or have been deliberately kept ignorant." Lily pulled up her tablet and began scrolling through files. "I have been doing some research on my own, digging through old archives, cross-referencing population data, that sort of thing. I found something interesting." She projected a chart onto the wall. It showed the number of spacefaring species in their galactic quadrant over time. The line started high, over 100 species, and remained relatively stable for thousands of years. Then, approximately 400 years ago, it began to drop sharply. Within a century, more than 60 species had vanished completely. "Everyone assumes the decline was caused by the consolidation wars," Lily continued. "But the timeline does not match. The wars ended 600 years ago. The species' disappearances started much later and continued for over a century. When did they stop? That is the interesting part." Lily highlighted a specific point on the chart. The disappearances stopped exactly when humans achieved faster-than-light travel. To the year, Nathan felt a cold sensation in his stomach. That could be a coincidence. It could be, but I do not believe in coincidences that convenient. Lily set down her tablet. "I think something happened when we went into space. Something that changed everything. And I think the reason the aliens are afraid of us is because they know what we did." Nathan stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the red landscape of Mars stretched to the horizon, dotted with domes and towers and the accumulated infrastructure of 2 centuries of colonization. Humanity had spread so far, so fast. He had always assumed it was because of their determination and ingenuity. Now he wondered if there was another reason. His grandfather had told him stories when he was a child. Old family tales passed down through generations about the early days of space exploration. About ships that returned from long voyages with their crews changed, speaking in strange unison about things they could not possibly have seen. About children born during deep space transit who could do impossible things. About a period of history called the Silence. When the government had forbidden all discussion of certain events, Nathan had always assumed these were just stories, exaggerations and myths from a more primitive time. Now he was not so sure. "We need to go to Earth," he said finally. Lily raised her eyebrows. "Earth? Nobody goes to Earth anymore. It is a museum planet. That is exactly why we need to go. If there are answers anywhere, they will be in the old archives. The ones that were never transferred to the colonial databases. And you think they will just let us access classified historical records?" Nathan smiled grimly. "I have spent 40 years building relationships with every major academic institution in human space. I have favors to call in. And more importantly, I have a theory that I suspect certain people have been waiting a very long time for someone to propose." They left Mars 3 days later on a transport ship bound for the Sol system. The journey took 2 weeks. Nathan spent most of that time reviewing what little information he could find about Earth's restricted archives. There were references to a facility called New Alexandria, supposedly the largest repository of human knowledge in existence. Access was strictly controlled, but it was possible to request research permits under certain circumstances. When they arrived in Earth orbit, Nathan was struck by how quiet the planet seemed. 7 million people lived on the surface, maintaining the museums and monuments that covered every continent, but from space, it looked almost abandoned. No orbital factories, no defense stations, no bustling traffic of ships coming and going. Just a blue-green sphere hanging in the darkness, surrounded by silence. They landed in a region that had once been called Egypt. near the ruins of structures that were old when humanity was still learning to write. A ground transport took them across the desert to a massive complex built into the side of a mountain. New. Alexandria was larger than Nathan had imagined. The surface buildings were impressive enough. Great domes of glass and steel that gleamed in the sunlight. But according to the briefing materials, the real archive extended underground for miles. Storage vaults containing the physical records of every civilization that had ever existed on Earth, maintained at precise temperature and humidity to preserve them for millennia. They were met at the entrance by a woman who introduced herself as Director Patricia Huang. She was old, far older than any human Nathan had ever met. With the precise movements and careful speech of someone who had learned patience over centuries, "Dr. Cole," she said, shaking his hand, "I have read your work. Your paper on convergent cultural evolution was particularly insightful. Thank you. I appreciate you agreeing to meet with us." Patricia's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. "You want to know about the blank century? The period we do not teach in schools or discuss in public?" I hesitated. "How did you know?" "Because everyone who comes here with that look on their face wants the same thing." She turned and began walking toward the main entrance. "Follow me. There are some things you need to see." We walked through corridors lined with artifacts from every era of human history. Weapons and tools, artwork and documents, the accumulated treasures of a species that had clawed its way from caves to the stars. Nathan barely glanced at them. His attention was focused on the director and on the answers she might finally provide. Patricia stopped in front of a door marked with a simple 0. No labels, no explanations, just that single digit. "What you are about to learn is known to fewer than 1,000 people alive today," she said. "There are reasons we have kept it secret. Good reasons. But you have asked the right questions, and that means you deserve the truth." She opened the door. "Welcome to Archive 0. The room was small and plain, containing nothing but a single terminal and 3 chairs. The walls were bare metal, unmarked by any decoration or signage. It felt less like an archive and more like a confessional. A place where secrets were shared and burdens were passed from one generation to the next. Patricia gestured for Nathan and Lily to sit, then took her own seat across from them. She did not touch the terminal immediately. Instead, she studied their faces for a long moment, as if measuring their readiness for what was to come. "Before I show you anything, I need you to understand the rules," she said. "You will not be permitted to leave this facility with any recording devices. You will not share what you learn with any non-human intelligence. If you violate these conditions, there will be consequences. Not from me, but from the people whose job it is to protect this information." Nathan nodded. "We understand. I do not think you do." "Not yet." Patricia turned to the terminal and began entering commands. "But you will." The room darkened, and holographic projections filled the space around them. Nathan saw Earth as it had been centuries ago, before the colonies, before the Great Expansion. Blue oceans and green continents, crowded cities and vast wilderness. A world that had no idea what was coming. 412 years ago, we made contact with an alien civilization for the first time, Patricia began. Or rather, they made contact with us. The Vorish Empire had been watching our planet for decades, studying our technology and population, assessing our potential value as a labor source. The projection shifted to show massive ships descending through Earth's atmosphere. They were ugly things, all sharp angles and dark metal, designed to intimidate rather than inspire. Nathan counted dozens of them, then hundreds, then thousands. The Vorish had perfected the art of conquest over 3,000 years. They would arrive in overwhelming force, destroy any military resistance, and then harvest the surviving population for slave labor. They had done it to 63 species before us. Not one had ever successfully resisted. The next images were harder to watch. Cities burning, military installations reduced to rubble. Crowds of terrified people being herded into transport ships. The Vorish soldiers were massive, armored creatures with too many limbs and weapons built into their bodies. Our military lasted approximately 4 hours, Patricia continued. Our nuclear weapons were ineffective against their shields. Our conventional forces were slaughtered. By the end of the first day, every major government on Earth had surrendered. Lily's voice was quiet. How did we survive? Patricia paused the projection. That is the question that changed everything. The answer is something we still do not fully understand, even after 4 centuries of study. She resumed the images. Now they showed the aftermath of the surrender, Boorish soldiers moving through ruined cities, cataloging the surviving human population, and then something else. Something that made Nathan's breath catch in his throat. A child. A girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, standing alone in the rubble of what had been Beijing. She was small and thin, wearing torn clothes, her face streaked with dirt and tears. A dozen Boorish soldiers surrounded her, weapons raised, and then the soldiers were dying. Not from weapons or explosives. They were simply coming apart, their bodies twisting and tearing in ways that should have been impossible. One moment they were advancing on the child, the next, they were scattered across the ground in pieces. The girl had not moved. She had not even raised her hands. We call it the awakening, Patricia said. When pushed to the edge of extinction, certain humans develop abilities that cannot be explained by conventional physics, telekinesis, telepathy, the ability to manipulate matter at a molecular level, and in rare cases, something even more terrible. The projections continued, showing scenes from across the planet. Children and adults, ordinary people who had never shown any unusual traits, suddenly manifesting powers beyond anything the Boorish had encountered. A teenager in Moscow who could read minds and transmit his thoughts to thousands simultaneously. A woman in Cairo who could see a few seconds into the future. A man in London who could kill with a thought. The Boorish tried to fight back, Patricia said. They called for reinforcements. They used their most advanced weapons. Nothing worked. Our awakened could sense attacks before they came, could turn missiles back on the ships that launched them, could reach into the minds of enemy commanders and stop their hearts. Nathan found his voice. How long did it last? The war ended 16 hours after the first awakened manifested. The Boorish fleet was destroyed completely. Their ground forces were eliminated to the last soldier. We captured their communication records, so we know that they managed to send one final message to their homeworld before the end. What did it say? Patricia's expression was unreadable. They are awake. May the void have mercy on us all. The projections showed the aftermath. Human ships, crude vessels hastily constructed from salvaged Boorish technology, launching into space. Following the path the invaders had taken, we should have stopped there, Patricia said. We had one. Our planet was free. But the first generation of awakened could not control their abilities. They were traumatized, terrified, and filled with rage. And they knew that the Boorish had done this to other species. That there were more slavers out there, more threats waiting to descend on Earth. They went hunting, Lily said softly. Yes, they went hunting. And they did not stop until every species that had ever threatened humanity, or might one day threaten humanity, was gone. The next series of images was almost too terrible to watch. World after world, civilization after civilization, reduced to ruins and ashes. Some had tried to fight. Others had tried to flee. A few had attempted to surrender. None of it mattered. The awakened swept through the galaxy like a fire, burning everything in their path. 63 species were eliminated completely, Patricia said. Another 41 were reduced to remnant populations. The Thessarian Concordat, the mindful collective of Yen, the Boorish Empire itself, all gone. In less than a century, humanity had killed more intelligent beings than all the wars in galactic history combined. Nathan felt sick. How did it stop? The second generation. Children born to awakened parents who inherited the abilities, but not the trauma. They could control themselves. And when they saw what their parents had done, they were horrified. Patricia's voice softened slightly. A young woman named Hannah Moore led the effort to end the killing. She was 8 years old and more powerful than anyone who had come before. She reached out to the surviving species and showed them that we could be different. that we wanted to be different, and they believed her. Not at first. The Galactic Council, which had formed specifically to defend against us, sent an armada. 12,000 ships from every remaining spacefaring species. They demanded our unconditional surrender. Patricia paused. Hannah walked onto their command vessel alone. She did not harm anyone. She simply showed them what we were. Every memory, every thought, every dream of every being on every ship. She let them experience humanity in its entirety. Our capacity for love and for violence, our terrible shame and our desperate hope. The projection showed ships drifting in space, their lights flickering, their crews silent. The survivors returned to their species with a message: leave us alone. Do not enter our space. Do not threaten our existence. Do not speak of what happened or why. In exchange, we would withdraw from the galaxy and never harm another living being. And the council agreed. Patricia nodded. They had no choice. They understood now what we could do if pushed. They had felt it in their minds, experienced it in their souls, so they erased us from their maps and their memories. They pretended we did not exist, and we pretended the same. The projections faded, leaving the three of them alone in the dim room. That was 400 years ago, Patricia said. Since then, we have worked to ensure it never happens again. We identify awakened children early and train them to control their abilities. We monitor the galaxy for any threat that might trigger another episode. And we keep this knowledge secret because if the other species ever learned the full truth, they might try to destroy us. And we cannot allow ourselves to be destroyed. Nathan understood now. The fear in the aliens' eyes, the blank space on the map, the silence that surrounded humanity in all galactic discussions. They were not ignoring humans out of prejudice or indifference. They were trying very hard not to wake the sleeping monster. Nathan did not sleep that night. He lay in the guest quarters of New Alexandria, staring at the ceiling, replaying the images from Archive 0 in his mind. 63 species, billions of lives, entire civilizations with their own histories and cultures and dreams, reduced to nothing because humanity had been afraid. He understood fear. He had felt it himself many times, but he had never imagined that fear could become a weapon capable of emptying the galaxy. In the morning, he found Patricia waiting for him in the Archive's central hall. She looked tired, which surprised him. He had assumed someone who had lived for centuries would be beyond such ordinary weaknesses. "You did not sleep either," she said. "It was not a question. How could I?" Patricia nodded slowly. "That reaction is appropriate. It means you understand the weight of what you have learned. Some people who come here try to justify what happened. They talk about survival and necessity and the greater good. Those people are dangerous. And the ones who cannot sleep? They are the ones we need. The ones who remember that every number in the death count was a person. A thinking, feeling, being with a life that mattered." She gestured for him to follow her. "There is more I need to show you. The harder part?" They walked deeper into the archive, past sealed vaults and security checkpoints, till they reached a section Nathan had not seen before. The walls here were lined with portraits, thousands of them, each showing a human face with a name and dates beneath. "These are the awakened," Patricia explained. "Every one of them, from the first generation to the present day. We keep records of their lives, their abilities, their struggles. It helps us remember that they are people, not weapons." Nathan stopped in front of a portrait of a young woman with dark hair and sad eyes. The name below read Hannah Moore, and the dates indicated she had lived for 97 years. "She saved us," he said. "She ended the killing and made peace with the galaxy." Yes, and she spent the rest of her life trying to atone for what her generation had done. She founded the monitoring program that identifies awakened children. She created the training protocols that teach them control. She wrote the ethical guidelines that govern how their abilities can be used. Patricia's voice was heavy. She never forgave herself for not acting sooner. She believed that if she had manifested earlier, she could have stopped the destruction before it went so far. Could she have? We will never know. The awakening does not follow predictable patterns. Some children manifest at age 6, others at 16, others not until they face a direct threat to their existence. Hannah was 8 when she first showed signs, but her full abilities did not emerge until she was 14. By then, the damage was done. They continued walking through the gallery. Nathan noticed that the faces changed as the centuries passed. The early portraits showed people with haunted expressions, survivors of trauma who had been transformed into something they never asked to become. Later portraits showed calmer faces, people who had grown up knowing what they were and learning to live with it. "How many awakened are alive today?" he asked. "Approximately 12,000. Most live normal lives using their abilities only in small ways. A few work for the monitoring program, watching the galaxy for signs of danger. A very small number are kept in isolation because their powers are too dangerous to risk in regular society." Isolation? You mean imprisonment? Patricia stopped walking. "I mean protection. For them, and for everyone else. Imagine having the ability to kill every living thing within 100 kilometers simply by feeling angry. Imagine knowing that a moment of lost control could end millions of lives. Some awakened cannot handle that burden. They choose isolation voluntarily because they are terrified of what they might do." Nathan thought about that. He tried to imagine living with such power and such fear, knowing that his emotions could become weapons of mass destruction. The weight of it was almost unbearable. "What happens if another species threatens us again?" he asked. "If someone decides to test the boundaries and attack human space, that is the question that keeps the monitoring program awake at night." Patricia resumed walking, leading him toward a door at the end of the gallery. "The truth is, we do not know. The awakening is triggered by existential threat, by the belief that humanity is about to be destroyed. If that belief takes hold in enough people, the abilities manifest. And once they manifest, they are very difficult to control. So the peace depends on no one ever pushing us too hard. Yes, and on the galaxy believing that pushing us would be catastrophic." She opened the door, revealing a room filled with screens and consoles, staffed by dozens of people monitoring data feeds from across human space. "This is the early warning center. We track every ship that approaches our borders, every communication that mentions humanity, every political movement in the Council that might lead to conflict. Our goal is to identify threats before they become serious and diffuse them through diplomatic or economic means." Lily was already there, standing before one of the screens with a look of intense concentration. She'd clearly been awake all night as well, but she seemed more energized than exhausted. "Dr. Cole," she said when she noticed him, "you need to see this." The screen showed a star map with human space, marked in blue. Surrounding it, the territories of the various council species were shown in different colors. And at the edge of the map, approaching from the direction of the galactic core, was a cluster of red dots. "Ships," Lily said. "Thousands of them. They appeared on long-range sensors 3 days ago, traveling at speeds we have never seen before. They are not from any known council species." Patricia moved to another console and began pulling up data. "We detected them before the council did. Our sensors are more advanced, though we try to hide that fact. The ships appear to be a new species, one that has never made contact with the galactic community. Where are they heading?" "That is the problem." Patricia pointed to the trajectory projection on the screen. "They are heading directly for council space. At their current speed, they will arrive in approximately 6 months. And based on the size and configuration of their fleet, they are not coming for peaceful purposes." Nathan felt his stomach tighten. "Does the council know?" "They will soon. Their sensors are slower, but not that much slower. Within a few weeks, they will detect the same fleet, and when they do, they will have a choice to make." "What choice?" Patricia turned to face him, her expression grave. "They can try to fight the incoming fleet themselves, using their combined military forces. Based on our analysis, they would lose. The new species appears to be technologically superior to anything the Council has ever encountered. Their shields are stronger, their weapons more powerful, their ships faster and more maneuverable. Or they can come to us for help. Break the silence that has lasted for centuries and ask humanity to defend them." Patricia's voice was heavy. "And if they do that, if they remind us that there are threats in the universe that want to destroy us. The awakening might happen again. This time, with 400 years of population growth and technological advancement behind it, Nathan understood now. The galaxy was trapped between two catastrophes: the unknown fleet that was coming to conquer them, and the human response that might be even worse. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Patricia looked at the screen, at the red dots that were slowly but steadily approaching. "That depends on what the council decides, and on whether there is another way to stop this without waking the monster." She turned to Lily. "You studied the awakening data in Archive 0. Did you notice anything that might help us?" Lily nodded slowly. Maybe the early awakened could not control their abilities because they were acting on instinct, responding to threat with pure survival reflex. But the later generations, the ones who knew what they were before they faced danger, they could direct their powers more precisely. They could choose to protect without destroying. "You think we could trigger a limited awakening?" Nathan said. "Enough power to defend against the fleet, but controlled enough not to annihilate everything." "I think it might be possible. But it would require the council to trust us, and I do not know if that trust exists anymore." Patricia was silent for a long moment. Then she made her decision. "We need to send a message to the monitoring station at the edge of human space. Daniel needs to know what is coming, and we need to prepare for the possibility that the galaxy is about to learn why the map ends at human space." She began typing commands into the console. "One way or another, the silence is about to end." Ambassador Kethvara had spent 3 months following the trail of missing records and half-spoken warnings. It had led her across council space, through archives and libraries, and the private collections of scholars who remembered things they were not supposed to remember. And finally, it had led her here, to a small diplomatic station on the edge of the blank space where the galaxy map ended. The station was modest, barely more than a habitat module with docking facilities for a single ship. It floated in empty space, surrounded by stars that no council species had visited in for centuries. The only inhabitant was a human named Daniel Parker, who had served as a diplomatic liaison for longer than Kethvora had been alive. He met her at the airlock with a warm smile that seemed genuine despite the circumstances. He was unremarkable in appearance, middle-aged by human standards, with tired eyes and a gentle manner. He offered her tea when she arrived, a human custom she had read about but never experienced. "You are the first alien to come here in 40 years, Daniel said, pouring carefully. I wondered when someone would finally work up the courage. Kethvora accepted the tea and took a cautious sip. It was warm and slightly bitter, not unpleasant. "I want to know the truth about what humans did, about why the galaxy fears you." Daniel set down the teapot and studied her for a moment. "Do you really want to know? Or do you want confirmation that your species was right to be afraid?" "I want to understand." He nodded slowly as if he had been expecting that answer. 400 years ago, we were prey, soft, weak, and ignorant of the dangers beyond our world. When the predators came, something in us broke, or woke up. We still do not know which. He gestured toward the window, toward the stars beyond. From here, the blank space on the map was not visible. It looked like any other region of the galaxy, full of light and possibility. "We killed so many," Daniel continued, "not out of malice, but out of terror. By the time we regained control of ourselves, we had become the very thing we feared. A threat to all life. Then why does the council not act?" Kethvora asked. "Surely after 4 centuries, some solution could be found. Because they are wise enough to understand the trap." Daniel smiled sadly. "If they attack us, they become the predators, and we become the prey again. The cycle begins anew. So instead, we have this: a silent understanding. We stay in our space, they stay in theirs, and the galaxy pretends we do not exist." Kethvara processed this. She had expected something different, some grand conspiracy or hidden agenda. Instead, she found only sorrow and exhaustion. Daniel was not a monster guarding a secret weapon. He He was a tired man trying to prevent a catastrophe that had already happened once. "You are not monsters," she said finally. "No, we are something worse. We are survivors, and survivors will do anything to stay alive." She thought of her own species, of the careful diplomatic dance they performed to maintain their place in the council, of the wars they had fought and the compromises they had made. Every civilization had darkness in its past, choices that seemed necessary at the time, but looked terrible in hindsight. "Perhaps that is something we have in common," she said. Daniel's expression softened. "Perhaps it is." They sat in silence for a while, two representatives of species that should have been enemies. Sharing tea at the edge of known space, Kethvera found herself relaxing, despite everything she had learned. There was something calming about Daniel's presence, a steadiness that suggested he had made peace with his role in the universe. Then his console beeped, and everything changed. Daniel walked over to check the message, and Kethvara saw his face go pale. He stood very still for a long moment, reading and rereading whatever had appeared on the screen. "What is it?" she asked. "A message from Earth, from the monitoring program." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that had not been there before. Fear. Real fear. The kind that came from facing something genuinely unknown. "There is a fleet approaching the galaxy from the core. Thousands of ships, technology beyond anything we have ever seen. They will reach Council space in 6 months." Kethvera felt her hearts beat faster. An invasion? We do not know yet. But based on the fleet configuration, peaceful intentions seem unlikely. Daniel sat down heavily. "The Council will detect them soon, if they have not already. When they do, they will have to make a choice." "What choice?" "Whether to face this threat alone and probably lose, or to ask humanity for help." Kethvora understood immediately. If the Council asked for human assistance, they would be admitting that the blank space on the map contained something they needed. They would be breaking the silence that had protected both sides for 4 centuries, and they would be reminding humanity that threats still existed in the universe. "The awakening," she said. "You are afraid it will happen again. You have spent 400 years preparing for this moment, training our awakened to control themselves, building systems to identify threats early and diffuse them. But we have never been tested. We do not know if our preparations will be enough. If they are not," Daniel met her eyes, "then the galaxy will learn why the map ends at human space. And there may not be much left of the galaxy afterward." Kethvora thought about what she had learned. About the Vorish and the 63 species and the children who had torn the galaxy apart because they were afraid. About Hannah More and the fragile peace she had built from the ruins of catastrophe. About the choice that now faced everyone. "I could warn the Council," she said. "Tell them what I know. Help them understand what they are dealing with."
Oh.
Daniel nodded. "You could, and maybe that would help. Maybe if they understand that we are afraid too, that we do not want to become monsters again, they will find another way to handle this. Maybe they will panic and attack you anyway. That is also possible." Kethvora stood and walked to the window. The stars looked the same as they always had. Distant and beautiful and indifferent to the struggles of the creatures that lived beneath them. Somewhere out there a fleet was approaching. Somewhere else, humanity was preparing for the worst. "I came here looking for the truth," she said. "I found something more complicated than I expected. The truth usually is." She turned back to face him. "What do you need from me?" Daniel seemed surprised by the question. "I am not sure I understand." "You have spent your life guarding this border, keeping the peace, trying to prevent another catastrophe. Now a crisis is coming, and you are facing it alone. What do you need?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was a different smile than before, one that held something like hope. "I need someone to trust. Someone who knows what we are and is not afraid. Someone who can help the Council understand that we want to help without destroying everything." He paused. "I need a bridge between our species, and I think you might be able to build one." Kethvera thought about her career, her reputation, the comfortable diplomatic position she had spent decades cultivating. She thought about the mysteries she had uncovered and the burden of knowledge she now carried. She thought about the 63 species who had been erased and the billions more who might follow if this went wrong. "I will do it," she said. "I do not know if I can succeed, but I will try." Daniel extended his hand, a human gesture of agreement that she had read about. She took it carefully, feeling the warmth of his skin against her scales. "Thank you," he said. "Whatever happens next, we will not face it alone." 3 weeks later, the council detected the approaching fleet. Emergency sessions were called. Diplomatic channels buzzed with panic and accusation. And for the first time in 4 centuries, a formal request was sent to the blank space on the map. The humans responded within hours. They sent a single ship, carrying a single passenger. She was young, barely 20 years old, with dark hair and calm eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her name was Sophie Allen. She was the most powerful awakened of her generation. She stood before the assembled council and spoke without fear. "We know what is coming. We know what you are afraid of. And we want you to understand something. We are afraid too. We remember what we did. We carry that shame every day of our lives. But we have also spent 400 years learning to control ourselves, learning to protect without destroying, learning to be better than our worst moments." She paused, looking around the chamber at the representatives of 38 species, all of them watching her with mixtures of fear and hope. "We cannot promise that everything will be perfect. We cannot promise that we will never make mistakes. But we can promise that we will try, that we will fight beside you instead of against you, that we will do everything in our power to save this galaxy without burning it down." The chamber was silent. Then Ambassador Cathvera stood. "I believe her," she said. "I have seen what humanity is capable of, both the terrible and the beautiful. They are not monsters. They are survivors, like all of us. And right now, we need survivors." The vote was not unanimous, but it was enough. The alliance was formed. Human ships began to move toward council space for the first time in 4 centuries. Carrying awakened volunteers who had chosen to risk everything for a galaxy that had once tried to destroy them, the fleet from the core arrived 3
months later.
The battle was terrible, and the losses were significant. But when it was over, the invaders were defeated. Not destroyed utterly, the way the Vorish had been, but pushed back, convinced that this galaxy was not worth the cost of conquest. And when the smoke cleared, something had changed. The blank space on the map was still there, but it no longer represented fear. It represented hope. The hope that even the darkest past could be overcome. The hope that survival did not have to mean destruction. Daniel stood at his station, watching the ships return to human space. Beside him, Cathvora observed the same view. "What happens now?" she asked. "We build something new. Something better than the silence we had before," he smiled. "It will not be easy. Trust takes time to grow. But we have time now, thanks to you." Cathvora looked at the stars, at the space where the map ended, at the future that was just beginning to unfold, thanks to all of us, she said. And for the first time in 400 years, the galaxy was no longer afraid to ask why.